on the wire right now, we have Mr. Dave Dictor of the legendary Millions of Dead Cops. Now, Dave, you've probably been doing interviews for the last 30 years, so I'm sure this is nothing new. Now, you guys originally started in 1979 as the Stains. Now, there's a pretty interesting story behind why you guys changed your name to MDC. It's got something to do with cops. If you don't mind telling that story one more time.
Well, it is a couple different stories. We were the Stains, and we actually were playing with Black Flag at the Cuckoo's Nest, and they billed it as the Battle of the Stains. It was the L.A. Stains with us who were the Texas Stains, being from Austin, Texas, and so we already didn't like the sound of that, and even at our tender age, we still had aspirations of being nationally known, so we didn't want to be, which Stains you're talking about, this Stains or that Stains. So we were looking to change the name, and there was all these rioting going on at the show with the cops just beating the fuck out of young people. I never quite saw that.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, have there to be like 30, 40 cops, coming out of cars, and there'd be helicopters, and and they were just whopping on 15-year-old girls, it was like looking at, oh God. And we started saying dead cops, they're the dead cops, and blah, 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 we should be the dead cops. And then our friend Pat of the Dick said, you guys should be millions of dead cops, and we all just kind of like stopped in our tracks, and that's how we named the band.
Like, fuck yeah, that works right there.
Yeah.
Now, it's a pretty controversial name. I'm sure it was back then. It still is now, I suppose. Have you guys had any problems associated with that name, dealing with shows being shut down or?
I mean, back in the 80s, go back in the Wayback Machine, some shows, there were certain clubs that things could happen, but, in parts of California and parts of all over the place, any punk rock show had about a 50-50 chance of making it the whole way through.
Mm-hmm.
Either the Elks Hall that rented it decided they hated punks, or someone called the fire department, and blah, 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 and, a lot of times, young punks would rent the Vets Hall or this hall, for $125, and then the people would see what was coming to the hall, and they'd freak out.
Like, we got to eliminate this element right here.
Right, and we got to close this show down and send everyone home, and, and safeguard our Vets Hall. This is not what we thought we were renting to, and then, all these different things from the neighborhood people would complain, they're pissing on our lawn, they're pissing on trees, blah, 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 the noise all night late, There's just a big section between 1982 and 1988 where about a third of our shows were shut down.
Yeah, a lot of people today nowadays in the punk and hardcore scene don't really realize, and I've heard stories from like Mike Ness and stuff like this, but
yeah,
walking around a punk rocker in 1984 was a recipe for disaster.
It really was. It was almost like an invitation for any redneck to jump out of their truck and throw a fist at you, and more. And then all of a sudden Mr. T had a mohawk, and next thing you know, all these fashion models had them, and secretaries in England, and it became this whole other thing by the mid-late 80s. But, early on, it really was a heavy-duty ticket. Going through borders was really a hard time. We tried to get into England and to play with Crash, and we didn't have working papers, and they just wouldn't let us into the country. They were going to send us home, and we were very lucky. Our Dutch friends from the band BGK spoke to British Customs and insisted police put them on a plane directly to Amsterdam and not send them back to America, so that would have killed the tour.
Mm-hmm.
But we've had a lot of different stuff through the years. Sometimes I forget how hard it was back then because it's gotten so much easier, and just the world has changed in 29 years since we've been a band.
Yeah.
It was much more redneck America in the late 70s and 80s. It still is in places. It still can be murderous. It still can be racist. But it was a different world back then. 30 years ago, but it was a different world back then. What led up to punk rock and what led up it still has the common definition of it was dehumanizing and de-individualization, and you feel like you're part of the matrix here. You feel like you're hearing everyone's tape loop bleep, which just kind of puts chills up your spine. But back then, it was full-on rednecks just constantly coming at you and attacking the shows and all that kind of stuff. Don't see it much now. I mean, you guys are still in Texas. I tell you, I couldn't wait to get out of there.
I bet, man. Texas.
82, we moved to San Francisco, and I'm not. Lord knows I'm not trying to mess with Texas, but it became a lot easier to live on the streets of San Francisco, and now I live in Portland. Than deal with the red state of George Bush, redneck fucking America.
Yeah. Now, and speaking of Bush, before Fat Mike put on his Rock Against Bush tour, there was something called Rock Against Reagan tour. And I believe you had a big part to do with that. And
yeah, we went on tour with DRI and the Dicks and a bunch of the punk bands, and it was all these yippies and buses and some kind of like the Electric Nixons and really funky doodle kind of thing. We shared some big events. We played the Lincoln Memorial with them, and we played the Democratic conventions, and we actually went on a tour. We played around 35 dates, and it was everywhere from Madison, Wisconsin, where we played with Bucky the marijuana beaver, to all these different kind of yippie events, and it was again in the early mid-'80s. And along with some Rock Against Racism in there.
So once again, it was all pretty new stuff, man. I mean, you guys did pave the way for where things are now in the scene.
We blazed some trails out there, and we didn't do it alone, but a lot of other bands. But there was a whole new concept back in '79. The way you thought you made a demo, you made a little single, and you sent it to Arista or one of the record companies, and you prayed they put you out. Mm-hmm. That was, and then someone would like you and decide you deserve to open up on the Clash tour, or you deserve to go on the road with the Romantics or whatever. Mm-hmm. It was, then all of a sudden we kind of saw Black Flag and DOA, and when we joined them soon thereafter, these bands that were going on tour, like in '80 and '81, and literally playing for $45 and a place to sleep, and all the peanut butter they could scrape onto a piece of bread. Mm-hmm. Now, and I'm going around the country doing a series of these $40, $50 shows and selling T-shirts and cassette tapes, and that was the world of early Minor Threat, Black Flag, Adolescence, TSOL, MDC. DOA, and all the other bands, that were a part of that period. I don't want to leave out too many bands. There were a lot of bands.
Yeah.
And, some of them ended up, making it through the threshold, and it was easy to not make it because there was a lot of gravity keeping you down, and it was just hard to sustain it. People had to be really dedicated to it because there was no money in it. It was just kind of a movement that you felt like it was a special time and that you could be part of it by being part of it. Mm-hmm. It didn't have the idea that somehow, I did think, all the kids would become punks and blah, 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 but not the way it did,
Yeah.
I didn't foresee, it getting into like a pop punk,
the head break off in all those different directions like that.
Right. And punk rock breaking up into like 4,000 different little subunits of Riot Girl, Butch, for trans, marijuana vegetarians. Mm-hmm. And, and then there's like just a new classification, speed metal, Hessian, hardcore, political.
Ska-core, ska punk.
All those different scenes, and, you see a lot of that out there when you tour. Just the world's breaking apart. But we're lucky. Like a lot of people see MDC. We can fit with an all-girl arty band, or we could fit with Os Rotten, Leftover Crack, or whatever.
Money hungry, power junkie.